Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to Storefront for Art and Architecture. My name is Carlos Mínguez Carrasco. I'm the Associate Curator at the Storefront for Art and Architecture, and I'm happy to see the gallery starting to fill up in the end of November. That is starts to be a little bit difficult. That's why we have some heating going on. Thank you for coming. This is a Manifesto Series, Souvenirs for an Ideal City. This is part of a programming that we have developed along with the exhibition that you can see right now in the exhibition, in the gallery, that is called Souvenirs, New York Icons, in which we basically address the question of how can we rethink the imaginary of the city, and how can we imagine that representation of icons or that reconstruction of the imaginary of the city by the idea of a souvenir. We invited 59 architects, designers, and artists to rethink or reimagine a souvenir for each of the 59 community boards of New York. So you can see all these 59 souvenirs of New York presented here. You can also see in the gallery guide all the descriptions of each of them, because all of them basically respond to that reflection of how can we reimagine that city that is usually commodified in a specific way when it's produced in a souvenir, right? So we were trying to think how that collective imaginary was able to be rethought or represented. We have had a couple of different programmings along the exhibition, and in this case, we are almost finalizing. We are going to be closing on December 9th, and we are going to have a Manifesto Series. Manifesto Series is an ongoing format that we developed at the gallery in which we ask participants to have a specific for and an against, right? A manifesto is always, as Tristan Zara said, something that you are against 1, 2, and 3, and you, in order to construct A, B, and C, right? So the idea today is that we are going to have a series of participants, some of them present in the exhibition, some of them coming from other imaginaries and other cities, in order to discuss what can be that souvenir for an ideal city today. We have a very nice group of participants today. We are honored to have Joep van Lieshout among us. But Joep is an artist and designer from the Netherlands. He is the founder of Atelier van Lieshout, a very renowned and fantastic atelier, a team of artists that have been really addressing questions of systems, power, sex, and bodies in the realm of art and architecture. So we are very pleased that you are here with us. I have to also thank Natalie, that is among the team, among the audience, that has been crucial in the conversation and made the whole thing possible. So thank you, Natalie, for that. We also have Arjen Oosterman. He is a critic, educator, and curator, also based in the Netherlands. He's editor-in-chief of Volume magazine since 2007. For the Archis, that is the Volume's publisher, he is dealing with the whole books and publications process, and he just published a book that is called Trust in the Blockchain Society. We have another of the participants of the exhibition here that is a collective called QSPACE, that is a queer architectural research and design studio that defines itself as a mixing queer theory, social justice, and design practice. Beyond a collection of individuals, QSPACE is a platform for research projects by students and professionals working on queerness in the built environment, producing research and outputs on topics such as gender-inclusive bathroom design, LGBTQ, homelessness and housing, and queer histories in architecture. And not present physically in the gallery, but in online right now, we have Marga Weimans. She is the leader and founder of an international fashion house that also based in the Netherlands that expands itself to multiple disciplines, including fashion, architecture, and fine arts. Weimans pushes the boundaries of the industry, exploring the connections between fashion and architecture, and has used materials such as wood, iron, and resin, as well as creating her own material by mixing fabric and fiberglass. Weimans is also interested in exploring the role of Black women in our current global complex culture. We have had some issues with flights today, where Eva Frank, the director of Storefront, she's coming from Australia, but her flight was delayed, so basically she's in the air right now. And Marga also had some issues with her flight yesterday, so basically we are gonna have Marga online and Eva in spirit, let's say. But I think that is gonna be a pretty amazing conversations. We are gonna have a series of presentations from each of the participants. I really thank you all for coming and doing the effort from coming from the other side of the Atlantic, but also from other side of the river, let's say. I also have to thank the Head New Institute by being a supporter of the project and a long-term supporter, collaborator with Storefront during the whole year. She's the Head New Institute has been a partner with Storefront during all this 2017, and also the Dutch consulate in New York that also has made possible the support of this event. So thank you for that, and thank you all for coming. We are going to start with the presentations, one after the other, and then at the end we will have a Q&A. So we will move the mic to all of you so we can have a conversation about souvenirs for an ideal city. We're going to start with Atelier van Lieshout. Please welcome Atelier van Lieshout.
Fantastic, it works. So, thank you for coming. And people who know my work know that I have created some societies, villages, cities, like AVL the Free State in Rotterdam, Slave City, which was a very dark, sinister project in which I researched the most rational way to deal with people by using them as slaves and to recycle them in the most environmentally friendly way. And but now I'm going to talk about a new tribal labyrinth, which is a project I started in 2010 till 2014, more or less. The new tribal labyrinth, and it has to do with basically this exhibition is about icons. And actually, I don't like icons because icons are something which is, I say, marketed stuff that is made for people to buy. And the new tribal labyrinth actually is a kind of counter movement to, to design actually. So the idea was that we live in our society in which the industrial production is done in the most cheap way in the countries where it's the cheapest. Let's say China, for example, or Mexico in this case. And we, people from the West, we are basically become like a tribe of service industry, bureaucrats, technocrats. So people who consume. So we become like a kind of a lifestyle society in which industry, agriculture, crazy people, prisoners, things that people don't want to see or which is not for sale basically, is tucked away. So that's why I wanted to create a new society, in which society where people organize themselves as tribes and then start being interested again in production, industrial production of real things, like heavy industry, like really like the dirty industry with a lot of burning coal, with a lot of pollution, with a lot of heat. The stuff that we all use but we don't see anymore. And also to become close again to this raw material, to come close to the origin of our society, of our culture, of our world. So what I did is reinventing the Industrial Revolution. And here, for example, it's called the Sawmill, which is basically, this is the sawmill, which is propelled with treadmills. So I wanted to create a society in which everything was done by hand, so also the industrial production. That means that you have like 16 men or women walking around, and then there's a whole system with gears and axes that propel this sawmill. Oh. And then on this thing, you put a tree trunk, and then you can slice beams and boards of wood. So in which you can create the material to build your new society, to build your villages, to build your cities, to build your industry. Basically, all this kind of material could have been made by this machine. But on the other hand, if you look in this industrial machine, you see things that are artworks or nice design or mirrors. So LED lighting, a charger for your iPhone. And so that you really see that it's like, you really have to think again, is this a utopia or is this a dystopia? Is this like slaves running in treadmills, sweating, having hard work in order to produce some beams of wood? Or is this the new utopia where people are dedicated to created raw materials in order to start building a new society? And also here, for example, that's the kitchen, which is built with the same kind of material as the machine. So basically the kitchen is part of the machine, and but it's also the, let's say, the center of life. So plants. So later, with the same machine, I make an addition to it. So now it's 24 meters long, and connected to the same axe, the same part that propels the sawing machine, is a cheese maker. So a very primitive cheese maker and a milking machine. So basically it means at the moment you start cutting wood, you also have to milk the cow and make the cheese. So it's a kind of a utopia, but on the other hand it's a dystopia, because then you have, you know, you have a lot of wood and the only thing you eat is cheese, and then there is the place where they all sleep. This, so it's a very, in a way, becomes a very stinky place. So I made a lot of those machines, like refineries for oil, all kind of tools, but also I wanted to make farms, and basically I wanted to make farms from the prehistory to the Middle Ages, to the present, to the future and the far future. And this piece is called the hagioscope, which comes from Latin, which means there where you can see the holy. And it refers to churches that we have in the Netherlands, in the north of the Netherlands, medieval churches, where you have in the wall of the church there's a little hole, in which you can look to the altar. And that's intended for the prostitutes and the lepers and the criminals, which are not allowed to go in the church, that they still can see the altar. So I made this kind of a farm from the year 0, in which there is like a kind of a cave dwelling like architecture, which is the kitchen of Maria. And this is the bedrooms. This is a bag full with skeletons. This is the pigsty. And this is the workshop, the carpenter's workshop. Another farm is the insect farm. So this is a piece from, well, 5 years old or something like that, in which was specially made to grow insects for consumption. And so inside there is silos and sieves and all kind of equipment to grow insects for consumption, which is becomes fashionable now. Now you can buy it in the supermarket, insect. But at that time, you can only buy it for if you want to go catch fish. But it's also a kind of a very Donald Judd-like structure. The farm of the future. For some reason it's, okay. So now you see the, the thing. So this is the food processor, which is an imaginary machine to create food out of waste. Something between a machine and an organism. And the penis. And this is, I don't know what happens with a picture every time. This is the cow of the future, in which I was interested in agriculture and, you know, on how to improve agriculture. So everyone knows that we have cows for milk, but in reality you have cows for milk and you have cows for meat. I mean, it's not the same kind of animal. I mean, of course you can eat a milking cow, but I mean, it's not very good. So that's why I thought, why should we have this animal with 4 legs and a head and horns and a tail and all this kind of stuff that you actually don't need? So why don't we genetically manipulate this cow so that we only have the udder, the digestion system, the heart, the 5 stomachs, and the asshole to create the milk? I mean, so why not? Why not make this machine and we keep all the other cows happy and free? Yeah. So this again is one of the machines again. This is the steam hammer house. A steam hammer is was in the past an important machine, and let's say 150 or 170 years ago, this was like the most amazing invention of the Industrial Revolution, which has a hammer of 6,000 kilograms that goes up and down, and then you can forge all kind of parts for ships, for chemical industry, for basically machines in order to make other machines. Nowadays, those machines became obsolete, so that's why I make this monument, and inside this monument there is a toilet, so a shower, and a toilet, there's an office, and in the, as it is now, there is a big kitchen here. So basically, what I wanted to do with this thing is to make the man and the machine become one. So not like normal people, not like robots, but just to become, like, to try to become a machine. This is another hammer, the power hammer, also a similar kind of machine that I also give it a very flash-like appearance, and I cut it open so you can see the intestines of the power hammer. And so basically it's also a kind of a organism. This is the a SmallLate, and this is the LargeLate, in which I also try to give a kind of a organic appearance and color. So it's a law, a kind of a law for machines. Like, you know, it's not. I wanted to make machines which is not like the result of a technical or rational design process, but I just wanted to make machines that look pretty and are too big and too fat and too heavy and too round and too not to the point. This is something else, a planer, angle grinder, jigsaw, and the pantocrator. So the pantocrator is also comes from Greek, and that means the one that rules over everything. Basically, it's another word for God. And so this machine is a very multifunctional machine. So you can make metal surfaces flat, you can make slits in it, you can make gears, you can make a lot of other things. So this is the machine in which you can almost make any other machine. And also, it's a machine, a God. And if you see it from the front side, it does look like a kind of a pieta. So this is one of the larger works of the new tribal labyrinth. It's called the blast furnace, and this is the machine that you need, of the installation that you need to produce steel out of coal and iron ore and chalk. Also here, there's the treadmills. So you fell asleep. Was so boring. Okay, good. Also, treadmills for 32 people to propel all the energy for the blast furnace. So this is the pump for making the air for the this is the blast furnace itself. This is how the coal is and the iron ore is transported. So, but if you look a little bit further, you see kind of residues of inhabitants. Is that English? Okay, good, good. Remains of stuff that people, you can see that people live there. So you see furniture, you see stuff, you see like a bedroom, you see other furnitures, you see some sperms swimming around, and more sperms swimming around, and more. And in the back, around this blast furnace, I put sculptures. For example, this sculpture, which is called the Exploded View, and which is all the human organs, like the heart, the lung, the liver, all the arteries, the digestion system, made as a sculpture. And you immediately see the parallel to the blast furnace, so which is also a kind of a complicated system with all the tubes connected to each other. In a way, I also wanted to say, like the man and the machine, they're very similar. Another sculpture is called the Horn of Plenty, like a big fertile woman with a big serving tray with 3 babies. And the Mama Papa lamp, which basically is a uterus and a penis at the moment of somewhere in between, transformed into a lamp. And at the end, there is the grave, the tomb for the human. So basically, what you see is this factory that is inhabited. So the people who said, okay, our tribe, the tribe of the metal makers, we are going to live all together in a community. We're going to work. We're going to walk every day in the treadmill. We're going to live inside the dirt, inside the heat, inside the smell, because we want to make our own iron. Not the shitty Chinese iron, which is basically the same, because it's iron, but our own iron. And what the idea was to go back to the origin of our culture, culture, Industrial Revolution. Also go back to the origin of design. So, I mean, this kind of crude materials and crude design is what you can make with this thing. So it's an attempt to close the gap between the designer, the producer, and the consumer. And it goes very much, has very many parallels to the arts and crafts movement a long time ago. Oh yeah, and that's me. But you can also see that that even the toilet, which is up here, is connected with the tube, and that goes directly into the blast furnace. So even the human waste is, and the human is part of the whole ecosystem of the production of iron. This is the domesticator, and why I show you this? I show you this because it's this sculpture or this building is the transition to the new group of work, which I call the crypto-futurism, which is basically about finding solutions for the future of our society. Solutions for energy, for food, for urban planning, for actually basically for the future. And this piece is about how the human domesticates nature, domesticates our world, which is a very common process. I mean, since the humans start domesticating, basically started agriculture, it became, that's the way how we built our culture. Without agriculture, without the domestication process, we still would have been hunters, gatherers, and not very fine civilized people as we are now. And but during this process of domestication, which keeps on going on forever, ethical borders are pushed. For example, and especially now, we have a lot of ethical borders being pushed, like ethical borders like genetic manipulation, robotization, artificial intelligence, big data. So all these kind of things that the human invent to improve the world, also kind of changes our world. And the question I want to raise is to think about this this process. And on the same hand, it's also a man or a woman fucking a dog or a pig or another man, or it's a little bit like well, let's say it's sex between man and animals, which is still a taboo, for which you still go into prison. And so this piece also caused some upheaval a couple of months ago in Paris, where it was part of an exhibition parallel to the art fair there. And then just before we installed the piece, the director of the Louvre said, because it was going to be in the garden of the Louvre, he said, "No, we cannot have this." So there was immediately a big scandal, and all the press jumped on it. And then finally the director of the Beaubourg Museum, another museum in Paris, said, "No, bring it to our museum." And so we got a lot of attention to it, and it's an interesting process because, I mean, the piece, as I told you, is about domestication and how the human controls the world, and about ethical questions about changing technologies. And then in the press and in the minds of many people, it just becomes a kind of a sexual act between two persons, or a man and animals. So now I also thought, what would be the icon for the new society of the new tribal labyrinth? Because it's a society, it's a group, an organization of tribes dedicated to production or agriculture. So one of the machines that we made in this new tribal labyrinth, was a small blast furnace where you can melt cast iron. And we also had a forgery. Oh, this is a foundry, by the way. And then this is the forgery. So out of a big piece of steel, there was a process of 48 hours of forging this big piece of steel into a cup, a steel cup. So this is made out of a big piece of steel, and it was been hammering by 3 smiths during 48 hours. So it's a very brutal, very heavy, very strong cup. And it's called the blood beaker. You say that? The blood cup. So the blood cup is called like that for two reasons. First of all, the steel is hardened into blood, which is an old-fashioned method to harden the steel. So you make the cup red hot, and then you throw it in a bucket of blood, preferably human blood, but pig blood is also good. And then the surface of the steel hardens, and if you touch this cup, it really has like a very high sound, like really like super hardened steel. And on the other hand, the blood cup, of course, also reminds tribal rituals where humans are being sacrificed, or some kind of obscure feasts are done to celebrate the pagan origin of our humans. So on one hand, my work wants to go to the future, to the constructivist future where technology is embraced. On the other hand, the work wants to go back to the origin, to the primitive, to the very obscure expressionist part of the human being. So that was it.
Thank you, Joep. We are going to move to Marga. Now let's get the technology going.
So as I said before, is that I was very interesting and kind of inspired by that question. How can you reimagine a souvenir for an ideal city? Basically, because this whole question about basically remembering and kind of deciding in a city what you want to see in the city of your past as a society and what not. Who do you allow in and who do you don't allow in? It's a very urgent question in Rotterdam right now and in the Netherlands. I'm from Suriname. It's a former Dutch colony. I'm a descendant of former slaves, of enslaved people. And this whole colonial past is really a big blind spot in the Netherlands. So it's really difficult to understand the cities. There's a lot of traces of this past in the city, but kind of Dutch society or Rotterdam has kind of chosen to not talk about that or not understand it. And that's, I think, in order to have an ideal city, an interesting and well-balanced city, you need to take stock of your past and not only highlight achievements, like achievements in the golden age of Holland. That is what Holland wants to be remembered for. It's like the big imperial and colonial achievements that were in the past. But you need to have really a current and actual reading of the city as it is, and be honest about the past. And, allow those narratives that might be kind of in at odds with this winner and achievement kind of attitude, that you also allow them in. For me, a city is a kind of a place where human life takes place, and really in an accelerated and very intense form. So I kind of, for myself, to also understand the question and answer it, I kind of thought like, okay, what's human life? What can you make a diagram of it? Can we understand it in a very basic way? And I did it also kind of draw it in a very basic way, but for me it's very clear. I kind of drew a human power system. You can read it. Here you see at this side you see kind of all the systems of power, like companies, political parties, governments. We kind of, as humans, have allowed to govern us in a most effective and organized way, and help us achieve our goals as human beings. In the middle, here you have that's here. Is what those systems of power actually do. They objectify or extract or colonize, optimize. So they're very, how do you say, kind of in an aggressive way, they kind of achieve the goals. And the objectification and colonization, and in some cases abuse, but in some cases also the goals are and the results are very positive, but it's aimed at people, at nature, at animals, at feelings, materials. So the use of people and nature and so on has a kind of effect, which you see here. It gives a reaction. Either people are satisfied with it, because it leads to prosperity, or it leads to destruction of nature, for example. So it has all kind of implications or moral reactions for people, even protests, which also kind of influence the systems again. So you have this loop of human activity which goes on and on, basically. So this whole human power system doesn't exist. It does exist in a kind of environment, a force field, I would say, and it's basically why is human life or the life of species on Earth, why is it there? There's a massive force at play which influences this human power loop, and also the life of animals and all earthly life. But there's kind of not a really understanding of what that force entails, and humans kind of have the history of feeling small and insignificant in this whole environment of the forces of nature. So we run to religion or spiritual explanation why life is there and why do we do what we do. And but it's basically a force, a void, no face, actually. But what is more and more apparent is that there's no need for humans to feel so small and insignificant, and better not, because the actions of our species, human life, has a tremendous impact on Earth, and it's actually the void in which we say, okay, we don't know what it is, we run to God and religion. Actually, this part, this massive force that is human, that is us. So we are creating a planet that resembles ourselves, or kind of meets our needs the best. And other species, other life forms, the Earth, are kind of suffering from it. In numbers, humans are the most dominant, and we are kind of forced to reckon with. And I think with that recognition of that human dominance in the world, with that recognition also comes the question: how can we be responsible for the world? How can we govern? How can we make the world a better place? Now there is actually a kind of a tragicomical situation that we know a lot, we do a lot, but we don't have a really thorough understanding of the effects we have on Earth, the forces we we unleash. We're warming up the oceans, and we're kind of unleashing powers which are very complex, and maybe they're not even stopped. So I think I was very optimistic in the past, but now I'm feeling quite kind of pessimistic, and I feel that we're kind of on a very slippery scale. So it's kind of the time for us as humans to take responsibility and really reimagine the future and be smart and be aware of what's happening in the world, to have as much information as possible, to have a layered outlook on life, and kind of counteract this colonizing short-term profit way of thinking. I kind of imagine this city as suffering from the same ailments as humans have. I mean, it's a kind of a manifestation of the human power system. So that situation of people having a lot of power, but sometimes not knowing exactly how to use it, and knowing how to create a balanced life in the city. That's the same for the earth as a whole, but also in the city itself. Right now, you have this whole discussion about gentrification, who's allowed in the city, who should stay out of the city. And also here we have to kind of imagine and take responsibility, and be aware of our power and understand the city, have an actual good reading of the city, who lives there, what kind of social, political things are happening in the city. Is there poverty? How's technology profiting or helping or not helping the city? What I kind of, in my manifesto, would like to emphasize is that being aware of the situation, and being aware of and understand and read a city well, that it can help achieving a city where that is inclusive and diverse, and it's a good place to be and live in. So what I kind of propose for a souvenir for an ideal city is not something, I will show you some examples like this, for example. I don't know anything, this is a souvenir from Amsterdam, but I don't know anything about Amsterdam. If I look at this souvenir, other than that I had a great time there, and it's a kind of testament of that I consumed that city. Here's a souvenir from Dubai, but I kind of can't actually read Dubai that well, or understand Dubai that well, when I look at this souvenir, other than on the level of consuming Dubai and buying a little piece of Dubai. Also, this is a souvenir from Suriname, but still I don't know anything about the deeper levels of Suriname, what is going on. Same from Zanzibar, or Portugal, or Texel in Holland, or Berlin. What's going on there? How are you, Berlin? How can we help you? Can I understand you? Next one, but I think I'm actually very fond of it. Doesn't deserve the sarcasm, but Corsica. How are you doing? Other than this little beautiful trinket. What I kind of made a kind of a sketch. So what I basically want is a kind of a 3D and real-time tracking of the city, and of the life there, and of everything that's happened there. And I wanted all the time around it, so I can see it 3D and somehow be connected with it. So I kind of proposed, made a kind of quick design sketch for the souvenirs called the EverChanging Heart, and for me it's a souvenir of an ideal city. Here we have a human power system. Is it here? Human power system. So I explained to you before, you have this whole feedback loop of producing and feedback and so on. But now you actually buy a beating heart, you take it home, and the beating heart is called Paris, or it's called Aleppo, it's called New York, or it's called Zanzibar, or Berlin, or whatever. You buy that beating heart, and it's connected through connected with the human power system in that city through data or internet or the internet of everything. So it's a constant update of what's happening in the city real time, and it also reacts to what happens in the city real time. So, for example, Aleppo right now is totally it's destructed, and other than the images we see on internet of that destruction, which can be very abstract and far away, you have this beating heart of Aleppo close to you in your house, and you see it reacting to things that are happening there. So maybe it's broken, or it's blackening, or there's smoke, or the arteries are clogged, and it's reacting. You can really feel what is happening there, and there's also a possibility to maybe change the health of that part of Aleppo in one way or the other. Or it could be, for example, the heart of Amsterdam, of Rotterdam, which is in some ways very prosperous, healthy and green and thriving. But on the other hand, some part of that heart are there maybe you can hardly see them, because there's a past that underlies that prosperity, which Amsterdam doesn't want to show to the outside world. Or maybe you have the heart of Reykjavik, and it's green, it's balanced. There's men and women earn the same wage, so it's healthy. It's there's all these variablen are feeding this heart, this souvenir, which is alive. It could be that if you are a well-traveled person, that your whole living room has or your whole space there are floating living hearts that connect you to the rest of the world. That is the end of my presentation, and I would like to show you a little animation of how that souvenir would look like. Okay, thank you, and thank you for the Storefront for inviting me.
Thank you, Marga. Thank you so much. We're gonna move to Arjen. Yeah, thank you.
I always forget to introduce myself, so maybe I start with that. Already was told you that I'm the editor-in-chief of Volume Magazine. Volume Magazine is a magazine that It's created in the Netherlands, formerly in collaboration with Studio X or C-Lab here in New York, and also in collaboration with AMO in Rotterdam. And we are creating a magazine that's looking towards the options, the possibilities, and for architecture and the questions society has, the needs society has for architecture and what architecture can contribute to society. So we're not showing what has been done, recently produced kind of magazine, but we're speculating on basically on the future. So a bit of speculation is also what you'll get tonight. And I called it Down the Rabbit Hole of Memory Lane. Bear with me because it's not a, let's say, a fully fledged train of thought, but some associations with the theme. If you had been an artist, I'd collected all souvenirs in my house and make a picture of that collection by way of a selfie. Show me your traveled treasures and I'll tell you who you are. This is one of them. I collect postcards. I never send any. The uglier the better. This Hollywood-like couple is supposedly representing the country of sangria, sun and sand. And passion. Why the woman wears the Dutch flag as skirt, not a clue. And why the man looks like an actor in a cheap soap series, maybe you can tell. And yet, this is Spain, probably in the 70s or 80s. These cards are no longer around, I think, these embroidered kind of cars. Today you won't find any of those. I also had one of the Pope, which I've unfortunately lost, otherwise I would have shown. So what do we have? Memory, mine, although I don't recall where and when. We have representation, we have cheapness, we have tourist industry. This product is not about quality or beauty, it is about making money. The idea that an experience should be brought home. The postcard as selfie avant la lettre, showing I was there, using the pretext, I'm thinking of you, you have my attention. Next, a little painting, the size of an iPad, actually. For you, maybe cute, maybe kitsch. For me, a representation of Shenzhen, more precisely of Dafen. China is known to be the factory of the world, the copycat king, and the painter's village Dafen is the artisan component of that story. Handicraft has shifted to other countries in the region, industrial production is moving out as well. The city of Shenzhen is in the process of reinventing itself as creative industry, but Dafen is still going strong as producer of cheap, $4, this one, mass-produced originals, or copies on demand. Hand-painted, no tricks. What strikes me in this image is the relative quality in comparison with a whole series of the same image in different sizes that I could choose from when I was there, but also the traditional theme. To indicate, I show you a Japanese 19th century scroll that sold at a different price, I must admit. No misunderstanding, these skilled guys and girls take pride in what they produce. I mean, the guys and girls in Dafen. They sometimes even go avant-garde in their free work. And skilled they are. You can bring a photo of your favorite Cézanne or Rembrandt and they'll reproduce it within 2 days. But the painting we asked for, because we also brought the reproduction, the painting we asked for, they didn't want to do. Unclear if this artist had been dead long enough to solve copyright issues. Another thing you wouldn't expect from a Chinese copy painter workshop. So what do we have here? Memory, authenticity, a peculiar copy-original relation. Next, an object that is not in my possession. Yet, I should add, because you can not yet, because I should add, you can purchase this. You can also admire it in a museum, being Het Nieuwe Instituut, that you collaborate with, and that's made this happening here. They dedicate an exhibition to a project they did with women from refugee camps in Lebanon. These women produced items that express their complex relation with the location they inhabit and the history it represents. This garter or purse is adorned with a distorted skyline of Palestinian houses, the memory of a place that is no longer the memory of a place that can't be. It makes an economy out of suffering, and it plays on guilt feelings with those that actually buy such items. Even if one is first attracted by its beauty or attractiveness, the story adds a quality that has a persuasive value. So what do we have here? Distorted memory, which is of the essence in this case. Commerce, advocacy, the inverse relation with memory, not your own, but someone else's. Also, the element of flux enters the scene. And before I go there is another souvenir relation to be discussed, bringing home. This is the site where you can buy this particular item, one of a series. Bringing home. In RSVP event number 4, that's events we organized throughout the years, shrink was a subject in relation to New York, and we brought souvenirs back to New York to remind the city that bigger, higher, denser is not necessarily better, and that we should question such taken for granted assumptions and mechanisms. At that time, we didn't know anything about Burj Dubai, nowadays called Burj Khalifa, which was also already shown to you tonight, that doubled the New York skyscraper in height and making the game to surpass the other futile and completely uninteresting. Maybe we'll see the 1-mile-high tower within a decade somewhere on this planet, but I couldn't care less, to be honest. It's completely out of sync with current conditions and realities. New York will continue with replicating uniqueness on the scale of the object, no doubt, but that is not what this exhibition, by and large, focuses on. So what do we have? Memory can have a critical relation with the source of origin. A bit of a tricky issue here in the States, I must say, because criticism or criticality is easily mistaken for a lack of respect, whereas in Europe, lack of critical engagement is understood as a lack of true interest, which is an interesting difference between two cultures, I think. Okay, so this is more or less the field the current exhibition explores, engagement, in particular in its social dimensions. In the souvenir tourism relation, a souvenir can hardly be critical, and yet this exhibition advocates a socially engaged appreciation of the current city. The ordinary can also, the ordinary can or should be seen as monumental, generic can or should be seen as characteristic, iconic qualities can't do without the presence and contributions of minorities, etc. The challenge as present here is to create iconicity out of the large reservoir of so far non-iconic material. Sometimes to promote the greater good, sometimes to improve a local situation, sometimes to correct what went wrong. Can I add a different perspective? Not past or present, but the future. The technological rat race currently going on is changing our cities and societies and will influence them much more in the near future. Datification will change the looks of our cities. It will change the accessibility of our territory, where to go and where not to. It will blur the physical and virtual even further. What selfie can one make in such a surroundings? And in the long run may even change the way our physical surrounding, the envelope, will interact with us. To give an indication, if you look at this picture, you'll say, well, there's traditional surroundings. This is what we know. But if you look closer, then you see that every sign, every traffic light, all signals are removed in this image, which is probably one of the visibilities or visible aspects about the technological advancement and the way it'll influence our public space. Or augmented reality, which will truly change our appreciation or direct vision on what we see outside on how we experience our cities and also how we can communicate about these surroundings. But what if we go even a bit more, well, maybe not utopian, but futuristic? This experiment, part of a studio, or an outcome of a studio in Delft, shows the possibilities with materials that can accommodate to circumstances. So you live in a bubble that will grow or shrink depending on the kind of activities that are developed inside. And if you think of such surroundings, then this hard, unchanging kind of reality that is touchable and definable and communicatable is completely at odds with these kinds of possible future realities. So, peeling off or adding on or open-ended, it will redefine the very notion of souvenir. A life without objects, a life without souvenirs. That's my contribution to New York.
Hi, we're QSPACE. I'm Lauren Johnson. This is Ryan Day. We're a queer architecture research and design collaborative. We define ourselves as mixing queer theory, social justice, and design practice, as Carlos mentioned. And tonight, QSPACE presents a souvenir for Staten Island CB1, Community Board 1, to commemorate a queer women's space in New York City. And then we'll follow with our manifesto.
So the Souvenirs are a half-scale resin cast of interior space in the Alice Austin house, located in the Narrows of Staten Island. The house is named for its most remarkable resident, Alice Austin, a noted photographer and lesbian icon who produced photographs of women intimately posed and occasionally in male drag. The souvenirs presented here reproduce 3 of the spaces in the house, known then as the Clear Comfort, that Alice inhabited for decades with her partner for over 50 years, Gertrude Tate.
If women's space is thought to be relegated to interiors, then queer women's space is one step further hidden away, particularly in Alice and Gertrude's lifetime. Interiority renders the intangible space the 2 women occupied in physical form, moving through the public and intimate spaces of the house. Reversing the obsession with obtaining totems of great feats of engineering and political fortitude, these artifacts, expressions of negative space, express the intimate lives of the bold women who inhabited them.
Represented are Alice's dark room. Thank you. Built into a closet on the 2nd floor, just tall enough for her to fit in and just wide enough for her to move around in. Then there is the corner cupboard in the dining room in the skin tone. I feel like I'm on QVC. And then finally is the stacked chimney, which shows below the public formal parlor where they would have entertained guests, and above Gertrude's private bedroom with which they would have kept the pretense up of sleeping apart.
Not a singular moment, this set of knickknacks is arranged on a tray in the fashion one might display their finest perfumes. Following Alice's lead of creating images of a queer woman's life in a time when such things went unspoken, these souvenirs capture and celebrate the unseen. In that vein, we wrote this QSPACE manifesto for a queer city, a queer public, a queer space, perhaps a queer urbanism, maybe even a queer feminist iconography for New York City. We took this assignment very literally, we're realizing, but here goes.
So, we are against towers, against designing from the exterior inwards, against hanging a pristine uniform curtain wall disguising the messy difference and diversity within, against the most obvious sin of the tower, the visual intrusion of the phallus everywhere, and the international pissing contest, that is, the never-ending tallest building of the world title. We are for nooks and crannies, for celebrating informal design while acknowledging the oppressive hierarchy of formal versus informal, for creative repurposing of spaces, which recognizes the adaptability of queer people that comes from marginalization, for opportunistic design and creating enclaves that celebrate, educate, and create community.
Number 2, we're against the architect archetype, against the figure of the brilliant man, the gatekeeper of design, who creates an aura of exclusion, against the feminization of interior design and the butching of engineering and construction, against, more broadly, the gender division of labor that places a higher value on, quote, men's work. Just have to take a moment to admire these still-kept heels. We're for queering practice, which is a concept we borrowed from Jaffer Kolb on his conference at Princeton of the same title, but we're giving him credit. We are for the recognition and compensation of domestic labor, for the recognition and compensation of creative labor, and furthermore, celebrating the work of queer people that some may consider folksy, kitschy, and camping. We're for ornament, for craft, for whimsy, for all of these modes of practice to be allowed to be considered rigorous, iterative, and what other words garner us praise in architecture school.
We are against public decency, against gendered public spaces and gender segregation, against the written codes and design standards that build in these gendered ideas into our physical space, often going unnoticed, against normalization of public space behavior and the expectation of conformity. We are for charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent, for public acknowledgement that we are all born naked and the rest is drag, which is RuPaul's succinct summary of Judith Butler's concept of gender performance, for an expanding understanding of gender diversity and intersectionality, and for codes and designs that reflect this growing definition of inclusion.
Sorry, I forgot to click through that one. We're against closets, against specifically this homophobic thread being the first hit when you Google the term gay architect. It's an architect forum from 2007 that's basically a few people speculating on the sexuality of a few prominent male architects and whether or not their sexuality affects their work. We're against the void of conversation and mentorship from openly queer folks in the field, and we're against the reading and study of exclusively dead cis white men with the understanding that precedent is biased and exclusionary. We're for visibility, for producing a new architecture library to offer a platform for marginalized voices and stories. We're for more queer representation in the built environment and broadening the field of architectural discourse by both reinterpreting its history and shining a light on lesser known works and figures. We're for creating monuments to invisibility and secrecy of queer spaces, which was our goal with the souvenir that we made for Alice and Gertrude, which ties this whole thing in a nice bow. So
on that note, we'd like to say thanks to the LGBT History Sites Project and Alice Austin House, and tell you all to go if you haven't yet been.
Yeah, and thanks for Storefront for having us. This was really fun.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So I'm going to invite all the participants to be sitting in these chairs, let's say. Joep, if you want to join us as well. Because like we have some time. It's we want to make sure that we have some time also for drinks. But I would like to open up the mic for the public. I can start with maybe a trigger for the conversation. I found it interesting and beautiful that basically all of you mentioned the future as a concept that was in which you were operative and you wanted to work with. And the other concept that for me was interesting was Joep's comment on the ritual, right? How the ritual that for you was part of the future, but also part of the a long past, let's say, was crucial for your work, right? And I think that the idea of ritual, the idea of memory, as also Arjen was mentioning, and the idea of minorities is very connected. Yeah. Thank you for that. We appreciate it. Yes, that's a Storefront. It's very connected to what we were trying to do here, right? To the idea of how to rethink a city, how to rethink the representation of that city, especially when the rituals yes, there are moments in which progressive thinkers might imagine like rituals in the future, but we also live in a place in which those rituals are actually non-progressive at all, right? And are actually very conservative, and they are like increasing the conservativeness of those rituals. So I would like to think about that. How do you negotiate that moment in which technology is bringing us to a new forms of relationships and new forms of urban space, in which that future is also rethought by some thinkers about how to imagine new societies, as you were saying, and how to negotiate that in a situation like the one that we are living today. Maybe it's like too wide, but I think it's good to start the conversation. Whoever wants to start.
Okay. Well, it's weird times in that respect in relation to your question, because on the one hand, there's segregation is continually going on. It's not only in New York; it's in every big city happening, and on the other hand, you see that the technology provides the possibility for networks, for collaboration, for creating relations that bypass all these borders easily. So it's confusing, and it's very hard to predict what the outcome of that all will be. I still think that the physical is quite important. So the very fact that gentrification is going on, and then gentrification in a negative definition of that notion. It's not about emancipation or progress so much. It's about occupation and exclusion, very much. So that is a very worrisome development at present.
I was thinking...
Relates to your story, I think.
I was thinking about if you could consider cruising like a ritual, then that's something that definitely has been affected by technology. Technologies like dating apps and Grindr, and some of the images we showed of the men in the veil, and now actually physically the city, through like city renewal, is redoing that part of Prospect Park and sort of brushing its huge role as part of the gay men of color community in that local neighborhood as a cruising spot, as a place for free and I don't know how access to sexual partners in a sort of safe place. And it's interesting that these sort of things that we think are moving forward, perhaps like redoing this part of the park, is actually taking something that's what could be considered sort of like gritty away, and they're having to kind of figure out how to deal with that and what it means to lose a queer space, and if anyone's going to be mad about that, or if that's going to be worse than if, say, like they have to like say, well, we're preserving this space, and people being like, that's offensive to me. So I think that's one of the interesting things that we're sort of thinking a lot about lately.
Also with the question of technology and how this is creating more communities, it's also being used on the flip side in some countries where Grindr itself is now becoming a tool for the police to find and group gay people. So it's also being aware of this great technology, but how it can be used in a very different way of what it's intended.
Joep, can I ask you, because your communities seem to relate to this in a very radical way.
Yeah, maybe like connected to the idea of representation, right? Like the idea of construction of icons or narratives connected to that.
Yeah, but I didn't get the question.
The question was very big, I can tell you. It was not a specific question. But I think that in your case, maybe like I would like to ask you exactly the role of representation, right? Like the role of how that reimagining of societies, how the idea of construction of icons. You said I hate icons, right? I don't like icons, but there is a construction of images, right? There is a construction of certain narratives that for you are very iconic at the end of the day, right, in your work. So maybe like the question would be connected to what is the role of that representation of society that you show in front of the Pompidou in order to produce certain society, right? Or certain ideas of community that are like beyond the aesthetics of the piece, let's say.
I remember when I was very young, and for the first time I hear the word icon and pop star. I didn't like it, and I think still, still the icon has something very superficial in it, and so probably that's the reason why I don't like it. So an icon is never trivial or dubious. I mean, icon is always something, has only one meaning. So there is not a single icon that looks like this, but actually is about molesting children or having bestiality relationships. So an icon is like a one-dimensional thing normally. So that's why probably I don't like it, because for me, an object, a building, an artwork, a human being should always have this kind of layers in it between the good, the bad, and the ugly.
But maybe then society and its representation, so to eschew the word icon, still you create societies that are, in your view, ideal. With no? Okay, correct me if I'm wrong. Please do.
No, the societies that I created, AVLVille, which were the anarchistic free state with a lot of fun parts about freedom, anarchism, lots of food, drink, sex, etc., etc. But it was also very violent. I mean, there was a lot of weapons around. It was not like if you have there was not like a social system or something. It was like really, you could say, where anarchism meets libertarianism. So I mean, it was really on discretion. And Slave City, which was a most sustainable green culture city, but it was only about making profit of human beings, an extermination camp. It was not racist because everyone could be a slave, and everyone who was not sufficiently producing enough would be exterminated. So it was very, all the villages, I could never say Slave City is bad, because I said, well, it's quite good. I mean, it's environmentally friendly, biological food, there's a lot of museums. On the same time, it was really very tough. And also the new tribal labyrinth, I mean, the people, the tribe that they say, we are going to produce steel, they are just doing this like heavy, unhealthy production work. So, but that's also what I like about a society. I mean, a society should be difficult. I mean, I don't think a society where everyone is having the same life and does shopping and cooks and sleeps and watch TV and do stuff on the phone, that should be not good. I mean, I like a society where you have crazy people and criminals, and that you have to take care of, you know, of your back and everything. That makes it exciting. So I don't want to have this ideal situation. I don't want to have an ideal society.
But that's another definition of ideal, I'd say.
It's
another definition of ideal.
Yeah.
That's your ideal. But in relation to your, I'd say, fight for a place and for recognition, but more than that, for physical presence, this is a complete different story.
Right. Is that, I don't know how to respond. Is that a question? Do you want to?
Yeah, we can go for something else.
You defend a case, and you questions very much, right?
We can open the mic to the public. You had a question, right? You raised.
What's an ideal? Okay. Hi. What would you say is an ideal queer space?
This is something we talk about a lot, and I think we think that there isn't one like definition, and we'll never really know what that looks like or if you can design that, but a lot of it has to do with kind of like the people in the space. And sort of our theory that we're sort of getting at is that it's really about like adaptability and finding opportunity in spaces, not trying to always construct something new. I think that's sort of like, to us, what a queer space is.
I have a question for Joep. I don't know, it might be a little bit about your work. I remember a project that I came across a long time ago, which I think it was the mobile house project, like a caravan with some additions to it. I think it was a project that I saw probably 15 years ago, piqued my interest, you know, for many reasons. Also in your first project that you presented, this machine with the saw, it makes me think that there's when I see the work, that there's the possibility of operating this machine or this house, you know, that like someone can actually step inside and maybe live there for a week, a month, a year, I don't know. And this is just wondering about your process of thought, because then when we look at the other projects, I don't know if it's right to say they're a representation of the scenery that you're presenting, of this sort of system. And I don't know if this accommodates the question of the future or not. It makes me think that when we're able to step inside one of these pieces and imagine ourselves operating this, it sort of brings us to the moment, you know, to the possibility of actually existing in that thing. While when we look at other pieces that are completely ironic in the sense that they describe all this, they become a future in itself, you know, as in our imagination and all that. So I was wondering how this happens in your process, and how do you move in between this question of operating the pieces that you create, or creating something that is more describing this sort of story that you're telling, if that's clear.
Yes, I mean, I always want the works that I make to function, but many times they just don't function because it's just too complicated or too expensive to make them function. But I always want to have the potentiality of working. I mean, with Slave City, for example, I made this Excel sheet like humongous, and I make the calculations about how many agricultural land we need, how much water, how much light bulbs, how many computers, how many prostitutes, how many male prostitutes, how many, everything was calculated. So I was months in a row, I was calculating like a maniac, trying to make the business plan for Slave City. And at the end, I mean, it was a very profitable situation. So I think the profit was 7.8 billion a year. So to me it was always, and I really think of it like, you know, I really want to make this Slave City, but of course I'm a dreamer, and at the end it doesn't work. And happily, probably. I think the fact that you don't know actually if it works or if I'm serious. I mean, the story that the icon of New Tribal Labyrinth, the blood chalice, how it's called. I mean, it goes on one hand, it goes to a kind of a romantic idea of creating something, and the other hand is kind of a symbol of fascism. I mean, in my work, this kind of utopia of the constructivist, of the progression, and the utopia of the expressionist and the fascism, they are very interwoven in a very dangerous way. I mean, I'm a little bit surprised that people still like me.
Can you explain that on your Trojan horse?
This one?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this piece, the two birds, it's called The Tribe, I think. Oh, I want my land back. Yes, that's true. Which was which was intended to be in the Bronx, and it's basically a piece for Native Americans that says, you know, we want our land back, tear up your roads, tear down your houses, get rid of all your stuff, and give it back to us. Which I think they should have it back. Why not? I mean, if I would be Native Indian, I absolutely would have like the whole Manhattan for myself. So justice. What? So, but yes, I don't know if I answered any question, but.
No, that was very clear. Any? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a very easy and straightforward question. Like thinking about cities and technology and behavior and strangers is how you feel about the subway, riding the subway in New York or maybe somewhere else. And do you feel optimistic or pessimistic in this question of the future and human beings? Is it queer? Could it be a queer space? Because I always think it's such a theater sometimes. Some situations in the subway, you know, it's like very unique. And I always think, oh my gosh, this is the venue where funny, like strangeness can exist. So I was just wondering if you guys agree or think it's irrelevant or what.
Well, actually, it's funny you mentioned that. We took it out of our presentation, but we have this thing. There's this thing that drag queens never take the subway because it's not actually a safe space. Like, you don't want to get stared at. Drag queens almost across the board take the taxis to their drag shows. There's actually, like, you can see videos of being like, I'm taking the subway. It's like, I've never done this before with Bob the drag queen. Anyway, I'm looking at my friend. And like, there's a drag queen that literally says, like, I'm so poor, I like take the subway. It's like a thing. So we find this really interesting that you could be so like the queen of the show, but yet not feel safe, like in the club. But then getting to the club is this like unsafe journey that we find really interesting. So to be explored further.
Do you know why they feel unsafe?
I think it's like probably staring. I mean, you see anyone that looks sort of like out of the norm on the subway, and everyone kind of like shifts. You know, I mean, I just think it's a really concentrated public space where a lot of times, I don't know how many people have had like and witnessed a violent interaction on the subway, like at least once, twice a year. So.
Yeah, actually, that's a pretty amazing commentary about public space as a whole, right? Like the subway can be a model for what the street is, that the space of safety, etc., etc. Any other questions? You had a comment?
Everybody, I mean, the show is about souvenirs and icons, and I was just wondering how yours changed or how you define that now. I wasn't totally, I don't know, I was just curious, like, you said something about he thought pop stars, and I didn't really understand what you said about pop stars and icons, and it just made me think how my icons have evolved over the course of my life, and I just think it's an interesting thing with what's happened, especially you talk about the subway and drag queens are being in New York. You know, we don't have the Twin Towers anymore, and we certainly, I don't know, I just think our definition of what's hot, what's not has changed, and how we view what a souvenir or a beacon or an icon can represent culturally or emotionally, or I don't know, I was just curious.
Yeah, we're currently engaged in a research called intangible heritage, and that's a notion that is added to the what is it called? The conventions on monuments and heritage by UNESCO in 2003, and it adds the element of, I would say, diversity in culture to this notion of what up to now is the hardware of heritage. Heritage is very much about buildings and environments that have to be saved for the future, maintained as well. And then this aspect of intangible heritage creates an opportunity for groups that so far didn't have, you could say, access to the possibilities of heritage, or were forced into the mold of heritage to come with their own definition and reality of heritage. And it creates, at least that's the intention, a more level playing field for the cultural dimensions in our societies, the diversity specifically. And that is an interesting development. And I showed a few slides that I didn't discuss because I didn't intend it to. But you saw, for instance, the castelleres, you could say ritual or festivity in Spain, in Catalonia, to make human pyramids, to build these 7, 8 story high pyramids of humans standing on top of each other as a social activity, a group activity that defines the space and the society maybe more than the buildings and the surroundings that we have on our postcards that we send home. And there's these kinds of social activities that are, I think, becoming more defining for what a place is and what its character, its specificity is, than the usual suspects like high-rise or park space or anything, museum, anything like.
That also goes on to going back to the souvenirs, is the one view that we changed on like what a souvenir is when we were in North Carolina and we saw the bathroom resistance there with all the laws and codes that are happening, that the little stickers welcoming people, of people defending like what they believed in and allowing more people to access their space, were also being sold as souvenirs themselves. So you could take what that local community believed and bring it back to your community and have the same representation there.
More questions?
No relation with the question.
Yeah, I mean, I find interesting the fact that what you say is like it's true. There is a lineage here that we are seeing, that it's the preservation of fragile parts. Let's say, the preservation of certain elements that are fragile in our society, and they need to be monumentalized, as you were saying before, right? But I feel that actually your work at Lieshout actually doesn't really connect to fragile parts, right? It's like you are okay. So let's talk about this. Like I think that like the way you present your work, it's actually more connected to a strong measurements, right? Like to strong gestures. And neglecting those elements of fragility that might not be important for you, right? Like the construction of society in your words seem like a much more stronger gestures, let's say. I don't know how you respond to that.
Well, I'm more into revolution and war than in trying to micromanage and to make everyone happy. The project I'm working on now at the moment is called cryptofuturism, which is about discovering solutions for our society, which include genetic manipulation, nuclear power, all kind of things that are very, how to say, difficult subjects. On the other hand, it also refers to the Italian futurists, which was an amazing movement a little bit more than 100 years ago of artists and designers that really wanted to change the world. And they did architecture, graphic design, art, dance, food, music, all kind of things. And they really believed in this kind of future, a new future in which technology played a big role. And they wanted to break with everything. They wanted to break with religion, with aristocracy, with classicism. And to them, they said, like, you know, war and violence is the way to speed up this process. So that's why they were very happy when the First World War started, and they were really thinking we're going to have a short war, and after this war everything will be difficult because everyone have a car, everyone can go to the movies, and we will get rid of all the religion and all the old stuff, and we will have a better world. The reality was different. I mean, the war lasted for a very long time, and many of them died in the trenches. And the leftovers of it, they saw in Mussolini, the fascist leader of Italy, they saw in him like the guy that was like having the same idea of progress, of like changing society, improving the world in the wrong way, of course. And so there was the second wrong choice that they made. So what I'm working on now is a project called The End of Everything, in which I basically start destroying everything. So I make machines, huge hammers, incinerators, big containers with the most vicious acid you can imagine, and you can throw something in, it just will solve. Hydraulic presses, like really machinery to destroy stuff, or maybe you can say to recycle stuff. I mean, we have this computer, we can smash it, and then we can take out the metals, and the metals we can melt, and then we can make something else out of it. So it's a very thin line between it's actually a work about transition. So how do we go to a new society? Are we going to do it in a very gentle way, by carefully recycling, or are we going to destroy everything in a very violent way and with a lot of horrible things, and then in the ashes we start anew? So I'm more, I cannot help it. I mean, it's not that I really like violence or something like that, but it is, yeah, I mean,
I think
violence is something that's still attractive to me, sorry.
I feel like our project's like the exact opposite of that. Like, they're given the like hyper masculinity of futurism and talk about phalluses everywhere. And so we're kind of trying to document the intimate lives of two queer women, which is also a sort of progress because they were so ahead of their time, and it was just this quiet sort of queer life that they lived together. And by just the simple act of photographing it gave so much hope to like women for generations to be able to say like, oh, there's other people like me. And so it's totally a different, maybe more gentle kind of progress, but progress nonetheless. So.
All right. So I think that's a good way to finish it. Thank you so much for everybody for coming. I think it was an amazing conversation. We have some wine. We have 10 minutes, but we should all continue the conversation. Thank you for coming.